1 year ago, I released a very similar video to this, with some basic tips on how not to be a noob when you're just getting started in The Last of Us multiplayer. Now that Remastered has released and introduced a pool of completely new players, I'm back again, only now with over a year's worth of experience in the game that amounts to over 100 hours of playtime. Now you can go watch my original video and it'll still be helpful if you find yourself struggling to do well in the game, but this one will be updated with clips from the new 8 DLC maps included with Remastered, as well as refined and even more extensive tips that will help you improve your win-loss and kill-death ratio. Tip number 1 has to do with class setup. Now, without spending an hour on the subject of class setup, which I easily could, I do have one loadout that I think should be very easy to use and very easy to do well with for pretty much any beginning player. The class is as follows: 9mm pistol for speedy shooting, large clip size, and the ability to disorientate your enemies with rapid fire. The semi-auto, which can be used effectively at literally any range, is incredibly versatile and very user-friendly. First Aid Training 1, which allows you to bandage yourself much faster. Crafter 1, which allows you to craft much faster. Reviver, which helps you revive teammates faster. And Explosion Expert 1, which will make your explosives more Michael Bay-y. I recommend First Aid Training and Crafter because you'll be less vulnerable while crafting and healing, and Reviver because, first of all, you get lots of parts for reviving teammates, and the faster you can do that, the better for everyone. But also because in Supply Raid and Survivors mode, your victory is literally contingent on whether your teammates die or not, so if you revive them while they're down, you don't lose any spawns. Explosion Expert 1 will help the effectiveness of your bombs and molotovs and is pretty much the best booster you can equip for one loadout point. Last, I strongly recommend you equip the shotgun. This is a fantastic last resort weapon to whip out when you're cornered or when you find yourself as the last person standing on your team. You can kill people with one shot at close range, and it may take 2 shots if they have armor if you're too far away, but so long as you practice with it a little, you'll get a feel for when it's effective, and it'll help you through rough patches infinitely.
Target down. Bomb's armed. Look alive. Bomb's armed. Nice. Nice work. If any of them show up, we got this.
Now this class setup was designed for players who have only 11 loadout points unlocked and just can't seem to get their kill-death ratio to go positive. As you unlock more loadout points, obviously feel free to upgrade and experiment with your boosters. I really highly recommend upgrading First Aid Training to level 2 or 3 when you've unlocked them, because not only will you be able to support your teammates by bandaging them, but you'll get tons of parts for doing so, which means you can buy even more armor, weapon upgrades, and purchasable guns. Also experiment with your large firearm slot. Try out the hunting rifle if you feel that you're better at long-range encounters. Give the full auto a try if you feel the need to have an automatic weapon. I also recommend at some point that you try the revolver on its own with no large firearm. This will free up loadout points for you to use towards other perks and purchasables, and the revolver is a jack-of-all-trades kind of gun. For more information on class setup, I've done a weapon review on every single gun in the game, as well as a more extensive look at boosters and loadout design, which you can find on my channel or in the description. Number 2 is all about purchasables in The Last of Us multiplayer. Now, I've noticed people have the tendency in this game to not use purchasable guns, armor, and especially weapon upgrades when they first start playing The Last of Us multiplayer. There's nothing difficult about doing any of these things though, and you'll find that the more you do it, the more you'll get a feel for when to purchase your specialty weapon or throw some body armor on, or which guns that you feel are worth upgrading. Just to explain how it works so you're not hesitant at all in multiplayer. The currency in the multiplayer is parts, and that's that green logo at the bottom of the screen. You're awarded them for killing and marking enemies, assisting teammates, and even crafting items. Keep an eye on how many you have throughout the match. Purchasable guns typically cost around 300 or 400 parts on an initial purchase, and body armor is usually around 450 on an initial purchase. I don't recommend you purchase armor though unless you're in a very tight spot, because otherwise someone might just shoot you a few times from far away and knock it off. Obviously that's the point of having armor, is that it takes the damage for you, but considering how costly it is, you really don't want to use it unless you're completely alone or outnumbered or low on health. Otherwise, just stick to cover, heal yourself, and if you do die, rely on your teammates that are nearby to revive you. The same goes for most of the purchasable guns as well, except these are good to purchase ahead of time because should you get into a situation where you need your shotgun or your flamethrower, you don't want to have to spend the time going into your bag to purchase it. In addition, when you do purchase it ahead of time, make sure you pull it out and load it up so it's ready for later. As for weapon upgrades, I recommend you always try to upgrade each of your guns at least once in every match. This is undoubtedly worth it for the boost in ammo, clip size, reload speed, and accuracy that you'll get. And for some guns like the semi-auto, the revolver, or the burst rifle, that second upgrade can also be very worth the investment. Number 3 is about executions. Unless you're playing interrogation mode, which I don't really recommend for beginners, just don't bother doing special executions. I remember when I first began playing the multiplayer, I had an urge to do a special execution on every enemy that I downed. And most of my deaths came from doing special executions because they leave you vulnerable. Instead, just try kicking them a few times with square or finishing them off with a bullet or two from the distance. This is quicker and safer. Not to mention, the only benefit to special executing someone is 75 extra parts, which, in my opinion, just isn't worth the risk of dying most of the time.
Hurry up!
Also keep this in mind when you're down. If you see your enemy coming in for a special execution, try luring them out into the open so your teammates can kill them while they're stuck executing you. Number 4, all about marking. Now hopefully every one of you knows by now what marking is, and I can't stress enough how helpful it is. I touched on it in my first video, but I'll go even more in depth here. While you're aiming, click R3 to mark an enemy, which will place a reticle over their head and alert your teammates of their position even through walls or at a distance. A handy tip that I picked up on pretty late actually, is that you can even mark someone while you're aiming a bomb or a Molotov. This is a great way of marking someone when you don't want to poke your head up from behind cover. The Hawkeye perk increases the effectiveness of marking, either through making the mark last longer, fully outlining enemies in red, or being able to mark numerous people with one click. I don't recommend using this booster though unless you can afford at least level 2. Getting a few extra seconds of that reticle isn't really worth the loadout points, but I do think being able to see someone's exact position through walls along with the extra mark duration is worth it, because then you know if they're in their bag, if they're vulnerable, if they're next to teammates, whatever. If you're playing as Fireflies, keep your ears open for other characters in the game shouting Firefly or Tourist. If you're playing as Hunters, keep an ear out for Hunter or Straggler. If you hear one of these things being yelled out, it means that someone is being marked, and it could be you.
Straggler, look alive!
Should you find yourself designing a class with one loadout point left to spend, Strategist isn't the worst thing you could equip yourself with, as it's cheap and lets you know when you've been marked. Also remember to mark trap bombs that the enemy sets, or just destroy them outright. Number 5, supplies. Now, something that may have you feeling overwhelmed at first in The Last of Us multiplayer is the metagame based around how many survivors you can keep alive in your clan. The amount of survivors you have is contingent on how many supplies, those blue things you get for killing people, you can pick up per match. By getting supplies, you keep your population alive, and your goal is to keep them alive for 12 weeks. Completing a 12-week journey as both Fireflies and Hunters is required for the Platinum Trophy, so this may be important for you. The number of supplies you collect also unlocks customization items, weapons, and boosters, so this isn't just some side thing that you can completely ignore. Now, every now and again, you'll be told to pick a mission in which you have to get a certain number of downs with certain guns, or a certain number of revives or marks or whatever. What I recommend for these challenges is picking the hardest ones early on in your 12-week cycle. In the first few weeks, at worst, even if you completely fail a mission, you'll only end up losing a certain percentage of your population. It's later on that failing a mission can mean losing your entire population and having to restart your 12-week journey. So leave the easy missions for last, like getting downs, executions, or if you're someone who uses first aid training 2 or crafter 2, the number of gifts or bandages that you give to teammates are undoubtedly the easiest missions in the game. Save those for when the game is threatening 100% of your population. As far as how to effectively collect supplies in-game, it depends on which mode you're playing. In Supply Raid, your supplies won't disappear until the match is over, which means you can slaughter everyone and then worry about picking up supplies later on. In Survivors mode though, they disappear at the end of every round, which means you should pick them up as soon as you can. One of the DLC boosters you can purchase from the store is called Scavenger. Level 2 Scavenger makes your character automatically pick up supplies and ammo just by walking over them. Now this isn't worth purchasing for the act of keeping your population alive, but it is worth buying for the extra ammo you receive for kills if you think that that's something you'll need. Number 6, crafting. Crafting is a surprisingly complex act in the game that affects your performance more than you might think. But I'm going to get into some of the more obscure facts of crafting and using supply boxes that you may not pick up on immediately. For one thing, if you want to craft modded melee weapons, the only place you'll ever find a 2x4 is in the supply box placed in the very middle of the map, halfway between your spawn and the enemy spawn. Now that only applies to Survivors mode, that doesn't apply to Supply Raid. I also recommend crafting a 2x4 as soon as you possibly can, should you have the materials, for a few reasons. A, it's a one-hit kill and practically a get-out-of-death free card. If anyone comes close, just swing this bad boy and chances are you'll be alright. And B, in Supply Raid, if you pick up a 2x4 but don't craft it into a modded melee weapon, and then you die, you lose the 2x4. If you craft it into a modded melee weapon though, you'll keep it even after dying. Now this next tip I have about crafting only applies to Survivors mode, and is actually a little bit more complex than all the other tips in this video, so don't pay too much attention to this one, but it can be helpful if you really like Survivors mode. Now as I mentioned, you get 30 parts for every item you craft. Often in Survivors mode, you'll end a round with a few supplies left over in your backpack that you did nothing with. That's potentially hundreds of parts over the course of a match that you're missing out on. So if you're nearing the end of a Survivors round and you have some leftover supplies, craft as many things as you can, and instead of crafting a nail bomb, craft a smoke bomb and a shiv, because 2 craftables will yield you more parts than 1 craftable. Chances are you won't even need these items if the round is almost over. Just get the parts so that you can use them for later. Mix this strategy with Crafter 2 or 3, and you'll find yourself with more parts than you know what to do with, not to mention you're giving enough presents to make your teammates think it's Christmas morning. The final thing I have to say about crafting is about health packs. I don't recommend you craft health packs unless you're in a life or death situation. Health packs can be found littered across all the maps, pretty much everywhere. As long as you memorize their locations, you should almost never have to craft a health pack, and this is especially important since Molotov cocktails rely on the same crafting ingredients.
Wiped out those hunters, but there's more impact. Get ready.
Number 7 is all about teamwork. This is one of the most important things I'm going to tell you in this video. Use your headset. PS4s come with a headset for a reason, and in this game, teamwork is unbelievably helpful and important. When you're spectating your teammates while you're dead, use the map's fixed cameras to let your teammates know where the enemy is. Stay in constant communication with your teammates. I wish I had more to say on this matter, but it's really pretty self-explanatory and will infinitely affect the performance of you and your team. While I'm on the topic of teamwork, get in the habit of marking enemies as well, and equip yourself with at least one team-based booster like Reviver or First Aid Training 2 or 3. Number 8, sprinting. Sprinting can be helpful in The Last of Us, but it also makes you appear as a red dot on the enemy's radar when you're close enough to them. Keep this in mind always. If you know the enemy is nearby, don't sprint. Just exercise patience. Or alternatively, if you want to lure the enemy to you, run around in a circle for a few seconds and watch the entire enemy team come running towards your position. This can be very helpful if you're the last man standing and you're holed up in a room with a shotgun and trap bombs or something. Lure them into a narrow passage and just light them up. Number 9. What not to do. I've talked a lot about what you should do in this video, but not a whole lot about what you shouldn't do. So let's start with some boosters and weapons that you should not be using in any case ever. Don't use pistol auto zoom, it's a waste of 1 loadout point. Don't use collector. It may sound great, but think about it this way. Even if you earn a total of 3,000 parts in a match, which sounds about right for beginners, Collector 1 is only yielding you an extra 300 parts. That's the equivalent of using 3 loadout points to upgrade a weapon once or buy a few extra bullets. Even if you upgraded to Collector 2 and you earned 5,000 parts in a match, while that is an extra 1,000 parts, you're much better off putting those 5 loadout points towards, like, you know, Crafter 3 or First Aid Training 3, which can easily get you the extra parts you're looking for while still actually improving how you play and actually helping your teammates. If you're a beginner, I'll caution you away from using the burst rifle. Some people can destroy with this gun, but as a beginner, you're better off sticking with something easy to use and reliable, like the semi-auto or the hunting rifle. The burst rifle has quite a learning curve. As far as playstyles go, never be a run and gunner. That will pretty much never work in The Last of Us because character movement just isn't speedy enough to pull it off. You're best off sticking by your teammates and being defensive as opposed to aggressive, and always having cover nearby. And number 10 is basically just a collection of totally random miscellaneous tips that don't fit in any of the previous categories but should still help you in certain situations. If you find yourself the last one standing on your team, either in Supply Raid or in Survivors, get to a supply box immediately. The game gives you better supplies if you're losing, and it gives you some truly magnificent ones if you find yourself as the last person alive on your team. We're talking pre-crafted bombs, Molotovs, machetes, purchasable weapon ammo, hundreds of parts, the whole 9 yards. Watch out for bombs that have been placed as traps by the enemy. These can be incredibly frustrating if you don't know where to look for them, but anytime you turn a corner or hop over a wall that's near a supply box, keep an eye out. That's usually where they tend to be. If you down an enemy who has armor on, instead of kicking them or special executing them, shoot their armor off while they're down. This will make them easier to kill the next time they spawn. If you see a red dot on the radar approaching you from behind at terminal velocity, turn your ass around immediately. This usually means that someone is going in to shiv you, and the only way to stop a shiv is to aim your camera at them. You can even be facing away from them, just make sure your camera is looking right at them and they'll be unable to shiv you. When you open a supply box, instead of picking up every item individually, hold triangle to pick up everything at once. So now that you've seen this video, as long as you keep these tips in mind and put them into practice, you should find yourself doing a lot better in The Last of Us multiplayer. In a year of playing the game, these are the things that I have found to be the most helpful. Should you find that you need more guidance in what weapons you're using or how you set up your classes, check out my weapon reviews in which I extensively cover every gun's pros and cons and in which situation or classes each gun is effective. If you're looking for multiplayer videos that are just more pure entertaining, check out my series called The Last Man Standing, in which I become the last player alive on my team and have to face the entire enemy team by myself. Outside of that, guys, I'm going to keep The Last of Us videos coming, both single player and multiplayer stuff. So be sure to subscribe to my channel and keep an eye out for my uploads. I'm going to do my absolute best to keep high quality content coming to you guys. So thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments and I'll try to get back to you guys. And follow me on Twitter as well for Last of Us tweets. I tweet about the game quite frequently. So with that, thank you for watching. I will talk to you guys in the comments.
They're almost finished. Step it up. Bound to be more coming.